You're listening to the Valley Current.
Okay, welcome into the Valley Current. We're here today in the face of impeachment proceedings. You know, I'm riveted to this stuff. My wife, Dr. Lee Suter, just cracks up and says to me, you know, why are you looking at it? Because I'm spending so much time. But now actually I'm using my time a little better here on a cold January day in 2020 because I have with me a great guest, Chris Broaddus, who's started a company I'm helping him with, which is called Moss AI, right?
Moss AI.
And the web address is www.moss.ai.
I wish it was. It's
it's
actually www.getmoss.ai.
Getmoss.
I couldn't afford the moss.ai.
Okay, so maybe once all financing comes in, you're off to the races, because you've done a lot, I have to say. I've been in this 40 years, and I think, as I told you, I started life as a computer programmer and made my way through a master's degree in computer science, and then went to law school and business school and moved to the West Coast and started joined the law firm that started Apple Computer, and a long, torturous history over the decades. But I've never seen any group do so much work with so little money and so little funding. And you actually have an app that just went live in the app stores, I understand, right?
It will, hopefully this week, yeah.
Right, so to do that with a small team, and so I want to spend a little bit of time talking about that, because you are sort of a magician in my mind, that you can do stuff so quickly that really accomplishes so much with so little. And I want to sort of get there in sort of a way that will set some context to those who listen, because when we do the Valley Current, we like to talk about starting a company, financing a company, growing a company, managing the growth, getting a product to market. And you usually have to do all these things before you get the product to market. You look like you got the product to market before you've done all these things, which is really great, because it sends a signal to those who are investing. Hey, these guys are doers. They're not just, talkers or thinkers or anything like that. They actually do a lot. So tell me a little bit about yourself, because we've spent some time together historically, but I haven't never gotten the really detailed version, like where'd you grow up, where'd you go to high school, and kind of how did you make your way to Silicon Valley, unless maybe you were born here. I moved here from the East Coast many, many decades ago, so I feel like I'm pretty much a Californian now. I certainly have paid taxes long enough to feel that way. But tell me your story.
Yeah, so I grew up in Houston, Texas. My whole family still lives there. And then that's where I went to undergrad, and then I went to Tennessee to do a PhD. Never really finished the PhD, just took my master's. Kind of wanted to get into industry, do product development and so forth. And I joined the SRI, starting off up in Princeton. So I moved up there, started doing a lot of defense projects, high altitude flights, augmented reality for the military, DARPA Grand Challenge. So about 6 years there, and then kind of realized I wanted to get out of the defense industry, get into like real product development, because at Sarnoff you get to do a lot of things, but it's actually hard to actually get something to a product with a integrated into the Marines or the Army, right, or wherever it is.
Right. People, let me drop a footnote here, because I've done a fair amount of writing, and I was one of the earliest people in the virtual reality and augmented reality, VR, AR space, that we just use that terminology, but our listeners are often lay people, are like, what is AR? What is VR? Why are you guys talking so fast? Slow down. Who's Sarnoff? They want the show to go on for 2 hours, and they won't listen for 2 hours, but we're not Joe Rogan, and this is not something that's going to play for 2 hours. But generally speaking, VR and AR have existed for decades, but seem to have had a new recovery after a long period of time, because of these relatively low-cost goggles that have made their way into the market. And most people don't know that this whole effort really started with the defense industry saying the pilots need to have in their cockpit space everything that's driving intelligence to their brain, visual, audio, all of that stuff, to kind of avoid the recent incident that we've seen with Kobe and his pilot smashing into the side of a mountain, right? Yeah. And so you were there, it sounds like, pretty early on. helping do a military thing where budgets are typically big, and it really doesn't matter if you ever get anything done so long as you move the experimentation process along.
Yeah.
But it can be frustrating that you build something great and it never sees the light of day, right?
Yeah, you can think of a lot of the projects that we worked on as military experiments. They fund the project a little bit. You get a team of 10 people to work on it for a year to prove something out,
Right.
and then they move on to something else.
Right.
But yeah, in those cases for the military, like pilots and so forth,
Yes.
the use of AR are very narrow and specific. They're trying to solve a very specific problem.
Right.
And then trying to apply this to military training exercises using wearable devices where the content is much more rich.
Right.
It's been shown in case study after case study that during training exercises, learning a new task, that AR proves beneficial. You increase the learning rate
Yes.
by use of AR. And then you got to figure out, okay, how do I take advantage of that and apply that to something that's more scalable with consumers and mobile devices and
Right.
consumer wearables and so forth.
And I'll drop a footnote here because I'm old enough to say this. When I learned how to drive, which was pretty young, I want to say 12 years old, and as I said at various times, you don't know this, but I worked my way through college by being a tractor trailer operator in New York City. Not an easy place to drive a truck, by the way. But there were no simulators for learning how to drive or to drive a truck. There were no video games yet. So my grandson, who has been, of course, brought up on video games and videos, he has learned to ride a motorcycle really much faster as a result of having the video games of riding motorcycles when he was like 7, 8, 9 years old. So he's on a motorcycle at like 10 years old, and now he's like a motocross champion at 12 years old. It's your point. The learning curve accelerates if you can drive simulation quickly to the human mind so it could train itself for all those maneuvers that have to occur. And I think obviously that's sort of something we haven't taken into account of, that more and more our kids and our grandkids and our great-grandkids are going to learn faster and faster and faster because of all these tools that are on the market. So tell me then, once you leave Sarnoff and leave, the SRI thing and kind of get out of the military game, where do you go and what do you do?
So I convinced my wife that I should accept a job in New York City. So we lived in Philadelphia at the time.
Okay.
So this was, if you're familiar with the East Coast, it's pretty long distance.
It's like a 3-hour commute, right?
About a 3-hour commute. So
Right.
I got an opportunity to take the Amtrak train between
The
Philadelphia.
bullet train that drives at far less than a speeding bullet.
That's
right.
right. So I got there in about 2 hours each way. So I joined a small little startup. It was called Augmento at the time, and then later changed its name to Flyby.
Okay.
But we were building AR games back in iPhone 4 timeframe when iPhone was pretty still young. But we built algorithms and a bunch of different things to be able to do pose estimation. So you can actually see something on the screen, and
Yes.
it looks as if it's attached to the environment.
Yes.
We produced many titles that were on the App Store over several years, and eventually partnered with Google. And we worked with Google on building parts of Google Tango out. And then eventually, the company found its niche in building the technology, and then Apple acquired Flyby, and that became ARKit, which is now on your cell phone. So it's a great that technology actually found a home and a great product.
A lot of people don't know that Apple even has an AR toolkit. When you say that, some people are like, but Apple, they do AR? Because if you look at the history, there's been lots of other Samsung plays towards AR that have gone up and down in fits and starts in different ways. And probably at this point, a lot of people don't know, Apple's made a pretty substantial investment. Apple apparently is building some sort of eyeglass-based wearable, according to the hubbub and the patent filings. But a lot of people are like, I haven't heard about that yet. But it's clear that Apple believes wearables are a big part of the future and that people won't be looking down at phones anymore, right?
Yeah, and I think it goes back to, in the future there will be something like a YouTube AR channel, where if you want to be trained on a new piece of kitchen equipment that you just bought off of Amazon, then you won't go to a YouTube channel necessarily. You'll go to an AR channel,
Right.
which will then allow you to wear a wearable, maybe it's
Yes.
Apple wearable or
Yes.
Google's wearable, whatever it might be in the future, but then you're being trained how to use that
Right.
new Instapot or whatever it might
Right.
be, but you're doing that in AR. You're not doing it through
Right.
a video.
And let me tell you, we have a high-end coffee machine at home. I swear I still don't know how to use it. It's got like 14 buttons and 16 dials, and I just want to press one button and make it work. So far, I haven't figured that out. And of course, I don't want to read the manual, which I probably should do. But let me ask you, how did you get the idea to start what is now called Moss? And tell us how you picked that name, because obviously it doesn't mean you're selling moss, which is this green stuff. But tell us more about how you got there.
Yeah, so on Moss, in terms of the name, we chose Moss for a few different reasons. So Moss itself, it doesn't really have roots. It kind of grows everywhere,
Right.
wherever there's water and
Right.
not a lot of sunlight. So that's kind of really what we were thinking of. It's really something that kind of grows everywhere. It doesn't really have any roots. And also, it does have a directional aspect to it in the sense that it prefers to grow on the north side where there's not a lot of sun, it's wet. It doesn't always do that because it just prefers wetness and darkness over a lot of sun. So that was kind of the reason why. And also, my wife helped me choose the name. So
Okay, always a good choice, no charge.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know why my head goes to that song, Moss Grows Flat on a Rolling Stone, but that's not how it used to be. Probably a Dylan song from probably, Bob Dylan. Who's Bob Dylan?
Yeah.
Bob Dylan from way, way back when. I guess he's still alive. But, moss is not something you would typically associate with either software or an app on an iPhone, and yet you decided to do that because you think it's suggestive of where this goes. So tell me why it's suggestive.
So the company's name is Moss. That won't necessarily be the product name.
Mm-hmm.
So the product will be focused in terms of what it's actually doing. But in terms of what the company's doing, it's really, we're kind of thinking about what's kind of the next thing with AR, and it's being able to perceive what is around you, to be able to understand it. And there's a few things that you have to do there to be able to interact with stuff, interact with the stuff that's in your living room, the chairs, the tables, the TV, whatever it might be.
Mm-hmm.
So you need to understand the shape, the geometry of that space. You also need to understand what's in it. That is a chair, that those pixels belong to a chair, that those pixels belong to a person.
Right.
And doing this either partially on device or on the cloud.
Right.
So you can kind of have a hybrid approach.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we're enabling right now is to be able to just use your cell phone, just one camera, not depth cameras or anything, just the camera, but be able to estimate that geometry in real time and also in the cloud, but then understand things about that space so that you can, for us, it means to be able to, I see a chair in your living room, I want to be able to replace that chair with a new chair. Or I want to be able to, from an image, remove the chair that's in the image and replace it with a different chair. But it's furniture. It could also be, I want to point my cell phone at a person and put a hat on that person and have it look real.
Okay.
Or change the appearance.
Okay.
Or you're wearing boots now, what are you looking like with sneakers on? But doing this so that you're understanding the environment, you understand the geometry, the perception of that space, and then being able to edit it, to change it.
Okay, so this room, we converted a back office and what was a storage room into a radio room. It's a relatively small room in the office space. And people couldn't really visualize it. And I, of course, visualized it for what turned out to be many years, and finally got someone to come in and say, yeah, you can turn this room. Your app, had it been used in this room before we turned into space, would have said, here's how many tables you can fit, here's how many chairs, here's what the microphones would look like. In theory, it becomes like a tool for an interior designer as well, is what I'm hearing.
Absolutely. So we're thinking about it from, I want to be able to sell something, I want to be able to digitize it and share it with somebody else, a buyer, and then they can see what that looks like in their space. That could also mean editing this room, removing the contents, and seeing what something else looks like. So that's all part of the buying experience.
Okay, so often what I say to people, and this might be viewed as kind of what a typical VC or super angel investor would say, why do you think people want that? Like, what compels you to say, people have been dying for this, they just really want this kind of visualization tool? What suggests that to you?
Well, you want to be able to virtually try something,
Yes.
and without actually having to physically put it into
Yes.
my space. So instead of having to actually wear the pair of shoes or change into a new pair of
Yes.
shoes, I can actually just see what it looks like on myself without having to do that.
Okay.
And the furniture side, I don't want to have to move all of my furniture out of the way,
Right.
have somebody deliver a sofa,
Right.
see that I don't like it,
Yes.
remove it and try something else.
Okay.
So if you can get some spatial understanding, some understanding in terms of what that thing would look like in your space or
Yes.
on you without actually having to physically do it,
Yes.
then the question is whether or not that's compelling enough for somebody to say, okay, yes, I
Right.
want that experience.
So I would think from a market segmentation point of view, this is the MBA and me from many decades ago talking, I would think that people like architects would be all over you. They would say, absolutely, we have to have this, or what's that company that is in Emeryville? I think they're in San Francisco now, not Adobe, but it's the one that makes the CAD tools that's been on the market for a long time. God, what is their name? I'm missing it. They were previously
Like
in Emeryville.
Autodesk?
Autodesk.
Autodesk, yeah.
I would think that Carol Bartz from Autodesk, now retired, if we could get her in, would say that's what Autodesk is all about. Autodesk is all about visualizing what to do with geometry.
Right.
You seem to have done it in a very low cost way. Like you're not spending I think it's thousands. It used to be on Autodesk, AutoCAD, used to be thousands. People would fall out of their seat. You're doing it on an app that is free or $9.95 or something like that.
Everything's free right now.
I mean, how does it
Yeah.
get better than free, right?
Right.
So, I mean, how do you think of that as, I mean, unfortunately, architects would be like, if it's free, it's probably junk, but you've shown me what you've done. You've done something pretty significant here, and it's free, and it's readily available on the App Store, will be shortly. Like, how do you get the architects or whoever to start going viral on stuff
Right.
like this? Because I would think you're right that the architects would be like, we need these visualization tools. Clients need to understand what this stuff will look like, or they won't sign the check that says, go do the blueprints, right?
Right. Yeah, so we decided to put the app on the App Store to really start getting some feedback. And so we want to see how people use it. If it's architects, if it's designers, if
Right.
it's somebody that wants to sell something on eBay,
Yes.
you capture on our app and you can share it on eBay. And we
Right.
don't force you to use our app. It's really a tool to enable you to capture the information, visualize it, and then share it.
Okay.
And so what we're really doing now is we want feedback. We want to see how people actually want to use it.
Okay.
Where is it that this way of perceiving an object or a space is
Yes.
more compelling than a photograph or a video?
Okay. So you have to sustain what sounds like a fair amount of marketing cost to kind of get enough users to give you a use case that you can then maybe drill down on. Like I would think, this is my head, you can tell me I'm completely wrong, there could be a segment of the eBay or Instagram market that says, we would love this. People want to see what an expensive piece of jewelry looks like on their middle finger before they decide to get married. You know, just to use that as a joke. But I think it's true. I think there is some truth to, before people go even shopping and spend the small fortune of time inside a Tiffany or whatever store, they're like, what do we want, a round or a square, a diamond, a da-da-da-da-da-da. Having a tool like that where you can actually pick off an image off of like an Instagram or an eBay, that's what you're talking about?
That's one avenue. Yeah.
I mean, to me, that would be high-end jewelry. I mean, there's huge margins in that. I would think you could almost private label for a Tiffany an app like that, and Tiffany would say, hey, we're in the App Store, look at our collection, look at what it looks like on your fiance. Hey, man, if that sells 10% more jewelry for them online.
And there's a very compelling reason.
I mean, think about it. There's a place that they must spend a fortune on, the Wall Street Journal. They run an ad almost every day for online expensive jewelry. It must work because they're spending like a lot of money in the Wall Street Journal for busy business people, both male and female, flipping through the Wall Street Journal. Oh, Valentine's is coming up. You got to get something. You're married, you have kids. You know how it works, right? You're doing a startup, which doesn't make it any easier. So tell me what the biggest challenge has been for you, because you obviously have a team. You obviously have a technology. You actually have proof of concept. You're now garnering actual data from the market. What's been the biggest challenge for you?
I think it's getting to an MVP or a proof of concept that's compelling enough where you can actually start to validate the product in the market.
Right.
Because if you try to have a consumer use something that it doesn't really work,
Yes.
you're not really testing anything, because
Yes.
they're going to tell you this is worthless, this is junk, but it's not
Yes.
because that concept is junk. It's because you didn't spend enough time on the application to
Right.
present something compelling.
Yes.
So getting to that point where we could actually present something to somebody that is compelling and get good feedback.
Yes.
That's kind of where we're at now, and that's the next step.
So you're, by analogy, and we represented Apple for many, many years, and the next guest that's coming on was with Apple for many years. I remember when Apple rolled out the Newton, a lot of people were like, what was the Newton? A Newton was actually a prequel or preview of what became the iPad or what became the iPhone, arguably. It was a very poorly done handwriting device by Apple, very big, very kludgy, but it was the beginning of an idea for what a tablet would look like, and it failed, and it failed badly. And people were like, well, Apple wasted a lot of money, sort of along the lines of, why did Apple ever have the Lisa, sort of a workstation like Mac that failed as well? Because there's a lot of learning in the failure, and that failure leads to the next thing. Like Tesla, the original little sports car, I would argue it was a failure. Elon, if you're listening, we can have this debate. I would argue that they learned a lot about what not to do. The same thing true for the Model X. I think the Model X, which is the big SUV, was and is arguably a failure. I don't think they sold as many as they thought they would. But the Model Y, the next one, is taking advantage of all the learning from that, because the Model X, I've driven it. They loaned me one for a while. I'm a Tesla believer. It's too big. It's sort of too big and almost not really sporty enough. And eventually I think the Model Y will be a much smaller version and a faster version of the Model X. So I use Tesla as an example because I think they've gone through a lot of failure and now are starting to reap the success. Mm-hmm. And the stock of prices, of course, has gone through the roof. I sold my stock too early, too bad. But the real answer here is that you learn a lot. So you are learning a lot. And then the question is, how do you get the VCs to buy into, because I think you will probably, if this remains a consumer product, want VCs, although maybe you'll be lucky enough to find an angel or a super angel that'll float the boat. But how do you get them to see, hey, we've learned a lot from all this and it's going to turn into something that really goes viral and becomes the next big thing? How do you do that?
I think the most important part is actually get the data to support it.
Yes.
And it goes back to how fast are you iterating and how fast are you trying, how fast are you experimenting?
Yes.
And that's actually should be a metric of any company, which is, are you doing 10 experiments a week? Are you doing 1 experiment a week? Unfortunately in the car business, experiments are very expensive.
Yes.
And they take a long time.
Yes.
But in software, you can do actually experiments pretty fast.
Right.
And so that's like a core metric that the company should use.
But that's also like saying, if you're a Facebook and a Google and you have huge feedback of data, you can experiment all the more faster and all the more better, and then therefore it's inevitable that you will grow at a compound rate greater than a smaller company if managed correctly, because you've got this huge feedback loop. So you're going to know a lot more a lot faster. Like Facebook released the Portal, the hardware device. I think it's failing. I think the jury is out on whether it is or isn't. They keep lowering the price. I actually like the device, but to me, they're going to learn a lot from the failure of that device.
Right.
And just that learning, that fast failure and fast learning cycle produces the next great product, whatever that will be.
Yeah.
Over time.
That's right. I mean, I think working in a silo, which is a lot of companies will say, well, it has to be perfect before they get something out.
Yes.
I think that might work for some companies. Like Apple typically does that.
Yes.
But they also do their own large scale case studies, but it's just done in private.
Okay.
Where you have other companies which will just get something out on the market, and Facebook does this all the time. Maybe they don't scale it up, but they get something out, they get the feedback, and if it doesn't look good, they shut it down and they try something else. So some products you can do this and some products you can't. For us, we're focused on hardware and getting everything to run on iOS and Android devices.
Okay.
So we can iterate as fast as we want. Just
nice.
How quickly can we code it?
So last few minutes of time, how have you adjusted to Silicon Valley? Because you're fundamentally a Texan that made his way through Tennessee and
New York City.
New York City, and East Coaster arguably come to the West Coast. Silicon Valley's got its own culture.
Yeah.
You've been here now for how many years?
I moved here in 2013.
Okay, so let's call it 7 years. Soon 7 years. What's your sense? I mean, are you staying? Are you leaving? I ask this all the time because there are people like, hey man, you got a 1-bedroom apartment, it's $2,000, $3,000 a month, and you got to have roommates.
Yeah.
What's your thinking?
I think for us, we've kind of settled in.
Okay,
and we've been very fortunate. Had great opportunities to work at amazing companies that went through hypergrowth and so forth. So we bought a house, we settled down.
Nice.
So we'll stay. I love Silicon Valley. I love what's out there. I mean, it's definitely a challenge. If you're a newcomer to Silicon Valley, you're trying to get established, you're trying to start a company, if you want to be an entrepreneur.
Right.
The most important thing here is network.
Right.
Meeting a lot of people.
Right.
And it takes a long time to build up credibility and trust.
Yes.
And I think a lot of investors or VCs or people know that the majority of ideas fail. But the fact that you get out there, you try it.
Right.
Maybe something comes of it, maybe something not. But at least you know that is just not something you should be working on. So go do something else.
Right. I mean, the point I often make to my partners here at the firm and to others around and to the side venture fund that we have called Florence Ventures is we like to invest in the person. We know that there'll be failure, but that they will likely be a serial entrepreneur, and if it isn't this one, it's maybe the next. I think I'm representing one guy in his 10th venture.
Hopefully this one pans out.
Exactly. I mean, you would hope that they would make it before them, but fundamentally it's a long game, and I like to say that you're betting on someone who's staked to the valley and its success, and really the nation and its success, and maybe being eventually a global company. So let's wrap up with how will people be able to reach you if they want to know more about your company, Get Moss, the name of the product, if they want to look at it at the App Store. Do you have a product name selected, or is it still confidential?
It'll be launched. I mean, the app is it's still kind of confidential in terms of what the app will be called, but to reach out, website is www.getmoss.ai.
GETMOSS.ai, and your email is
Chris, CHRIS, at getmoss.ai.
And I often suggest you leave a phone number, but you're so modern, you probably won't want to do that. Your phone might be ringing off the hook.
That's fine. I can leave my phone number. So it's 650-996-8376.
Okay, great. And so Chris is one of the great young, but now heading towards middle age, Chris. I hate to tell you, if you have kids and you're married.
I'm 40 in March.
Oh, so. You look great, man. So you look like you're still in your 30s, and you are. And Chris really is someone that I believe is going to be successful. I'm certainly behind him. Computer Law Group is behind him. We act as counsel. I'm also pulling together some folks that'll do either an angel round or something else for him. So if you're interested, call me, Jack Russo, managing partner at Computer Law Group in Palo Alto, California. Of course, the website is computerlaw.com. I'm Jack, JCK, at computerlawlaw.com, 650-327-9800. Thank you, Chris, for coming in. Thanks for doing the podcast.
Thank you so much.
Tune in next time on The Valley Current.